You're all going to be shocked because we're going to move on to another section of verses, something new. Kind of, but I'm going to carry over too from last section of verses. There's just so many ways to play with in a good sense and interpret this text. It's just amazingly inconceivable. I'm looking at page 5051 on my text. I'm not sure that that's the same. I have a digital version, so the last verse was, of living beings and lands, neither one nor many can be attained. To contemplate well and observe in this way is knowing the meaning of the Buddha Dharma. That's the last link. And then tonight we begin a refrain that introduces the next. And I won't spend too much time on the refrain, but I will read it and put it in the air. Everybody got that section? The Chinese is Er Guangming Guobai Wan Shijie. And I will spare you my horrible Chinese and just do the English, which isn't so great either, but it's better than my Chinese. So the text says, at that time, light passed through 1,000,000 worlds and everywhere illumined 1,000,000 worlds to the east. It was also like this in the south, west, north, and the 4 intermediate directions, as well as above and below. Within each of those worlds, there were 1,000,000,000 Jambudvipas, reaching up to 1,000,000,000 ultimate form heavens. All of these were clearly revealed in this light. And just as in this place one could see a thus come one seated on his lotus flower treasury lion's throne, with bodhisattvas as many as fine motes of dust in the 10 Buddha lands circumambulating him, so too in each of those billions of Jambudvipas there were billions of thus come ones seated in the same way. Because of the spiritual power of the Buddha in each of the 10 directions, there was a great bodhisattva who was accompanied by bodhisattvas in number of fine motes of dust in 10 Buddha lands who came to the Buddha's place. Their names were Manjushri and others. They came from countries called Golden Colored World and others, and the Buddhas they served were called Unmoving Wisdom, Thus Come One, and others. At that time, in the presence of those Buddhas, the voices of Manjushri Bodhisattvas in all those places rang out in unison as they spoke these verses. This refrain, or this piece in between here, is throughout the text. It has many purposes, and you can work with it in many ways. In some ways, if you just close your eyes and let the imagery and the words and the pictures and the feeling sort of wash over you, it can have a profound effect that isn't necessarily intellectual or cognitive. It can be emotive, yes, poetic, but also spiritual in a sense, that what really moves and touches us is often not the words themselves, but the images and then the stimulants that get released by these. This is language with imagery that's meant to cleanse the heart and the mind. It's not to, you can try to analyze it philosophically, but that's not what's going on here. It's more of laying out a world or worlds or a reality that these sages, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas live in. You can take it as a metaphor if you want and play with it that way. You can take it as simile. You can take it as symbolism. All of that's fair game. But you can also, if you want to let your mind stretch a little, take it literally and just say, this is, I would say this is you know, like CNN reporting here. Here I am in Jambudvipa, and oh my gosh, this light has been released, and look at what it's showing, and the camera spans, and you go, and not just this world, but millions of worlds, and then the camera's able, this is an enlightened camera, this camera can catch out and go, and you're just going, your jaw's dropping, and you're watching this, and it's just saying, and that's what it is, that's the news today, this is what's going on outside of Berkeley, outside of your little world here. There is this world that's simultaneously going on. That's what the text is purporting for us to. And how do you see that? It's not CNN. I'm just sort of being facetious here, but it is through an awakened mind, through a pure heart. When things calm and settle, it is said with one thought, unproduced, this entire reality starts to manifest. When the mind is really calm, and not projecting, not expecting, not desiring, not full of negative emotions and so forth, this world or these worlds start to open up. So you can't get there from here, so to speak. You can't get there from analyzing it or looking at commentary on it. But you enter almost in absentia, you enter as the self shrinks, this opens. It's kind of paradoxical because we think we can use will and effort to get everything we want, but ironically in this teaching, in this tradition, by letting go and opening up, this comes forth. It's not the way you get it through grabbing and grasping. On the other hand, you don't have to take this literally. I'm just suggesting that this is one way, and I would suggest the way the text meant it to be seen. But that doesn't mean you have to accept this on the matter of faith or belief or anything else. It's just a possibility that you leave yourself open to. One of the questions we ask when we're doing this academic study called hermeneutics, and hermeneutics has to do with the methods and theories, criteria of interpretation. How are we to interpret this text? What are we to use? And one of the more key points in hermeneutics is to ask, what are the conditions that make understanding possible? What are the conditions that make understanding possible? So when you look at this text and you say, I don't get it, it's not making sense. The mirror-like hermeneutics would be, what do I have to do and change to be able to get a handle on this? Rather than saying, well, you know, if there was a different guy up here besides, you know, Mr. Verhoeven, we get it, but he's up there blah, 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 and he's not making this clear, we get a better teacher. Maybe not, maybe so. But the conditions for understanding this have to do with some shift and transformation in your whole person. And this begins with morality, clearing up your conscience and your relationships with others. Then it goes into a certain equanimity that comes from that morality. And that equanimity deepens and deepens into a stillness called samadhi that eventually opens up and reveals this, which is the world of prajna or wisdom. So the formula is very basic. Morality, meditation, contemplation, and gnosis or understanding. These three follow in sequence. That's the conditions for understanding. So when we read a text like this, it's really interesting when we ask, well, what does it mean? And especially this passage, what does that mean? Part of the question you ask when you read a text like this is also, what is it asking me to do? Not just what does it mean, but how is it asking me to be different in some way? And so these texts are meant to be catalyst or transformative devices to shift our paradigm, to shift us out of a sort of homeostasis and cause us to look at things differently, look at ourselves differently, look at our lives differently, ask what I could do to improve my mind and my relationships to myself and others in such a way that the clarity that would come from non-harming and a heart of goodness would actually change the way I see things, literally change the way I see things. So it's quite an amazing kind of formula that's embedded here, and I want to always bring this up because this is how my teacher opened these texts for us, was if you sit there passively and wait for understanding to come, it's not going to happen. It might happen a little bit, but if you change yourself, prepare the ground, sometimes they use the soil of wisdom to describe the human being is a soil. if you prepare that ground, when this stuff comes, surprisingly, it can cause something to flower. But it cannot happen one-sidedly. It can't happen that every time I come to the text, I don't change my life, I don't change my habits, I still hang on to my greed, anger, and stupidity. I love them. I love them. I nurture them, my precious, and I really develop all these bad habits. And you come to the text, and it's just going to be the same thing. And it's going to actually go the opposite way. It's going to start to make less and less sense. And then, anyhow, so that being said, I wanted to just look at this first verse here tonight. Just to say we started the new set of verses. Whether we get to go into it or not, I don't know. But it says, here's the verse says, let's see. Okay, terrible Chinese, ready? Please help me. Please. Nice and loud, those of you who know Chinese. Actually, if you don't know Chinese, nice and loud is really good because nobody will hear me. We're looking at 智慧. 智慧无等法无边 照诸有海到彼岸 寿量光明悉无比 四功德者方便理 By the way, if you want to learn Chinese, Buddhist classical Chinese, this is the text. This text is so simple and straightforward for the Chinese. Unlike the Shurangama or say the Vajra Sutra, this is really easy to do. Relatively easy. That too, never mind. With unequaled wisdom and boundless dharma, he transcends the sea of all existence and arrives at the other shore. His lifespan and brilliance beyond compare. This is the power of expedience of the one with merit and virtue. So there's 10,000 ways to interpret this, and what I said I was going to do, and I'm going to try to do this because I realize this is chapter 9. There's chapters to get to 40, and I really want to lecture this all. Not lecture. This is funny. That's presumptuous. I want to explore this and go into this with all of you before I pass. And I just noticed that I'm passing faster than I thought I was. Each day it gets a little quicker. So now that I've turned 34, that doesn't leave much time. And if I keep going at the pace I am, we may never get out of chapter 9 before you send me off to my ashes. So what I'm going to try to do is just pick out central points or themes in some of these verses with the idea that there's no way to exhaustively do this. So what I'm suggesting here from the previous verses that we come in a sense to full circle, because these verses that we're going to get into now are all dealing, if you look at them in your text, and you'll notice that the third or fourth line is always the same. This is the power of expedience. This is the power of expedience. This is the power of expedience. You've got 10 verses here, all ending with this Su Ai Hui Feng Bian Li. So I'm going to say, oh, the theme of this 10 verses might be expedience as a repetition. Now we noticed, if we go back, I mentioned I thought in the earlier verses, the first 4 of the earlier verses were descriptive of the Buddhist state, turning the Dharma wheel, particularly focusing on being free of discriminations, and we spent a whole long time talking about what that was, discriminations inside and out, and so forth. But I suggested that somewhere would be verse 5. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We first see this within all worlds and all places, he turns the Dharma wheel, meaning teaches, exposes. And I want to say, by the way, that this is not just words and lecturing. It can include art and music and silence, turning the Dharma wheel. It can include doing retreats. It can include beneficial world activity, making the world a better place. This is all turning the Dharma. Don't think that this is just words and language. Actually, if you decide to be a parent and you're a really good parent and you do a good job, that's turning the Dharma wheel. On the other hand, the opposite is true. You're just, never mind. But to do things well that cause people to become better people and to prepare a ground for them to actually enter into the spiritual path is turning the Dharma wheel. And that is what I'm taking here. Thus the guiding master speaks, teaches, or is in silence expediently. Now this expediently is a transition here, then it goes on. The next verse is finished, but you notice this section then we're getting to is dealing all with that. So why this transition here to expedience here? Because what's describing, especially wonderful in those verses that came, the last verses is they're able to enter the Buddha's Bodhi. They're actually able to enter into and become fully enlightened. Then the last verse there, and that's the knowing the meaning of the Buddha Dharma. So there's this incredible transformative event that happens where they get fully awakened. By the way, Monk Heng Sure is describing this, and when I was saying, my teacher always said, don't think this isn't about you. It's about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is about you. If you look at his voice here, why is he describing this? Like, duh, the Buddhas know this, so he's not describing it for the Buddhas, right, who are there saying, tell me what I should do, Monk Heng Sure. No, they already know. So Monk Heng Sure is, in a sense, being a voice for the enlightened one and telling us what we should do. This is meant for ordinary people. So he said, you want to enter the Buddha's Bodhi, you want to have that, here's what you should do. You're doing what they did. You're going to walk the same path they walked. Where did it start? Right on the ground of being a human. It didn't start in the heavens. So then the question is, why this? And I think the reason why you have the Buddha's Bodhi, this wonderful state, and then you have this whole thing of expedience, is because the gap between awakening and sleeping can be immense. Some of you maybe are here tonight, listening tonight, and this may resonate with you to remember how it was you got to becoming on a Friday or Saturday night or going to a Dharma lecture or reading a sutra. Go back to where that wasn't even in your world at all. Now some of you say, well, it's always been in my world. I was born a baby Buddha, maybe you were. But even those who are from Asia said, I was born into Buddhist. That doesn't mean you were a Buddhist. Kids just do what their parents tell them to do. It's not necessarily that you were a Buddhist. You went to the temple, you bowed, you lit incense and prayed to Guanyin to get you into Harvard or something. But that's not being a Buddhist. So even if you have that background, getting from just a cultural or external kind of going through the motions to an internal dynamic Buddhist orientation, there's a transformation that occurs. And I don't know when it occurs. Some people at a very young age, you can see with the Buddha himself, the transformation occurred in his early 20s. Really. I mean, for other people it's later. For some people it might be earlier. But something happens where that changes. And part of that change is suddenly you realize, wow, everything I've been doing pretty much before this is pretty upside down, pretty confused. I was lost, I was afraid, I was alienated, I wasn't even in touch with myself, much less in touch with others. I was just sort of bumbling through, creating a lot of negative karma. And not even aware I was creating negative karma. I thought I was pretty cool and whatnot. Suddenly, this starts to change. Why? Could be a death in the family. It could be a moment of waking up from sleep. It could be seeing someone who's spiritual and sagely, and all of a sudden, by reflection, you say, oh my gosh, how does somebody be like that in comparison to me? But the interesting thing is it's a stimulant. It's not a bummer. It's like, I could be like that, couldn't I? And so when that starts to kick in, you suddenly become a different person. You've made your first step in the way. And often it's a little discombobulating because the previous habit energy is who you thought you were. And when you change over to this new one, you become soft and vulnerable because you're shedding. You're shedding friendships maybe, you're shedding job or career if you're going for a right livelihood. You're shedding self-image, how you look, how you feel about yourself. You're really reorienting in so many ways. And that kind of growth is also vulnerable because it's no longer crisp and confident. You're no longer putting out this facade of who you are. But that's the beginning. It's like you going back to be a baby again, a baby in the way. Then you realize maybe the gap between the awakening and the habituation can be huge, the unawakened. And this habituation is the word they use for it in Chinese is shiqi. And it actually pictorially is like, basically, if you think of the wings of a hummingbird, they're going so fast, you can't see them unless you do slow motion photography, and suddenly you can see the wings going like this. But normally, because of habituation, it's just what we're doing reflexively like this. Our words, our speech, our thoughts are in a habituation like this, just by the way, most of what we have available to now in social media and AI and whatnot is going to make this even faster. So you won't even be able to see yourself anymore. A single thought will seem like what? Good luck. Okay. It makes changing that habit energy, and the texts are pretty good about this. It basically says it's like taking an oil or ink stain out of a pure white cotton cloth. Even though you work on it, that habituation wants to return, it wants to come back. It's if you think about it, it's sort of like if you have grooves in the soil, in the earth, when it rains, that water will go down those grooves again. And it will not only go down and course through them again, it'll make them a little deeper, a little more receptive. So over time, our habits become like this. The river at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, that river carved out the Grand Canyon. So some of us are just in the puddle stage. We got a little creek going, and some of us are in Grand Canyon state, where our habituation is way, way down driven. So turning that around is really hard, really hard. One of the reasons it's really hard too, from my own experience, I know the ones that are the deepest and the most powerful holding me are the ones I see the least clearly. So the deepest habituations are on what we call the skanda level of samskara, which is the unexamined, almost precognitive, unconscious level. They're so deep, and they're driving. It's the mechanism within the mechanism that drives us, and we are the last to see it. Other people can see it, but we ourselves not only do not see it, we protect ourselves against seeing it. So it's really tricky. This is why having these texts, having a good Dharma friends, and if you're lucky, a good teacher who pokes at you and makes you go ouch, 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 and see that is really valuable, because usually we surround ourselves with the other. We surround ourselves with friends that reinforce the habituation, make us feel good about our blind spots and so on and so forth, and that we call, a social circle. Whew. Anyhow, so I think what happens here, this power of expedience comes up because the Buddha has to speak or teach expediently, because there's no way to convey this meaning, the deep meaning that he's getting here. And in this, it talks about basically that last line you saw, there's nothing to attain, there's nothing to get. This is at the heart of coming to full understanding of that, grounded. That turns into what they call wondrous existence. However, ungrounded, coming to confront that turns into a kind of fearful nihilism, like there's nothing then, and there's no meaning, there's nothing to get, and you start to freak out. When you start to freak out, the grasping goes further and further and further. So spooked in that way, that's what happens. So the Buddha, having realized, having seen through and put down everything, having reached what was called sunyata, true emptiness, suddenly goes, oh my God, there's nothing to do. No. Goes, how inconceivably wonderful this state. Seeking nothing, needing nothing, being in the center of my being, whole and complete. It's beyond compare. There's nothing that can compare to this. I can't even use words to describe it. He says, I can't describe it. You can experience it. It's beyond words, but it's not beyond reach. This is from the Avatamsaka later on. Maybe we'll get to that section. But this is a wonderful moment. But for ordinary people who are confused and asleep, the very idea that there's nothing to get and nothing to obtain isn't liberating. It freaks them out. And that's why it says in the text, it's very difficult to hear this even, much more difficult to understand and accept. That basically what my teacher used to say, everything's okay, no problem. He was basically using English expression to say that's nirvana. Everything's okay, no problem. Not like everything's gonna be okay. No, everything right now is okay, no problem. That's really profound. You know, you keep thinking about, what does that mean? What does that mean? But it isn't just an intellectual understanding. This is the point I want to make. We know intellectually that there's nothing to attain. I mean, come on, folks, really. We know this, right? Everything we experience is in the process of change. Anything we grab or hold on to cannot last. I was joking the other day, as I put on my watch. It's a watch my father gave me. The watch is about 90 years old. So my father wore it, and now my father's gone, but the watch is still here. I'm wearing it, and I will be gone, and the watch will still be here. So even the watch, though, will finally go too. But I'm just saying, in the race, there's a lot of things that outlast me. You know, and so that if you understand this intellectually, you can read the poets, you can read Shakespeare, read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, whoever you want to look at, they're all keenly aware that there is nothing permanent and lasting about our human experience as we experience things. It's just absolutely true. We can pretend it's not true, and we can therefore gear our lives around running away from that reality, which the Buddha says is another kind of dukkha, another kind of suffering, because there's no way to run away from it. And he said basically the human response to this is threefold. He says it's a misunderstanding, but from that misunderstanding, I often give this story from the Jataka, which is the monkey under the tree when the breadfruit drops. Remember? Now you know the story is Chicken Little, but it's really from the Buddha Jataka stories. The breadfruit drops, and he goes, oh my God, the sky's falling. It hit me on the head. And so this fundamental misperception then leads to the story, you know, all the animals get all excited and go all chasing to say the sky's falling, a whole stampede, and the Buddha says in the story, whoa, wait a minute, to the elephant. Where did you hear that? Oh, the giraffe. The giraffe says, well, I heard it from, you know, the cheetah. The cheetah says, well, I heard it from the alligator. And he goes, so we got it back, I heard it from the monkey. And the monkey, I experienced it firsthand, said the monkey. And the Buddha said, oh, well, let's go back and see where that sky is. And they go back to the tree where the monkey was sitting, and it's a broken breadfruit, and the monkey's abashed and blushing. Oh my gosh, I misread. Sorry. So what the part of the story has to do is when we make a fundamental misperception of the nature of reality and spook at this truth, we start to go, and the Buddha said you will go for kama. You just do hedonistic pleasure, to eat, drink, and be merry, and hope you can, you know, avoid it that way. Or you'll seek for immortality, a long and unending life. Hence the infatuation with organic food and sports and supplements and transplants. Who knows what's coming next, right? This whole thing. Or, he says, a third one is you'll go another route, which is you'll seek to blot out feeling. You'll enter a state of longing for oblivion, which can be manifest as sort of drug alcohol-induced stupor, a slow suicide, or just a kind of blotting of your nerves, of your sensitivity, of your emotions. So you're like a walking dead person. And you think you beat it that way. But in any event, these are called the three thirsts that come from this. So even though we know it sort of intellectually in our hearts, there's a place where these unexamined desires and longings, attachments accumulate, and it's really quite emotional. It's not intellectual. It's not, we don't want to examine it. So we take the fear of that and we push it in one corner, and we take our aversion of that and move it into desires into another corner, and that fear and desire is what's known as attachment. So we grasp and attach facing this. The Buddha, encountering this, says directly, I cannot teach this direct liberating encounter. And because it can't be taught, it only can be directly experienced, it has to be experienced in ways that are gradual and shaped according to each individual. Some people can get it pretty quick. I mean, you look at someone like Huineng, the sixth patriarch. He's out, he's not literate, he's illiterate actually. He's just out gathering wood. He hears somebody in the shop where he's putting some wood for delivery say a line, let the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. And he has this profound awakening experience. That's it. That's it. Bing, the bells go off. He goes, he says, where's that from? And the guy looks at me, he says, well, it's from a sutra that this master is lecturing at this monastery. Drops the wood, tries to take care of his mother as much as he can, get her set up, and what the equivalent of her retirement plan, and runs off to this monastery to pursue only that. That's Huineng. Now, I can tell you, I could probably say that line, we could put it looping on, the YouTube, let the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing, let the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. And maybe 1 in 10 million people might have a response. So what that is, it has to do with incredible good roots and spiritual affinities that have been cultivated over lifetimes. So that one verse like that, on top of all of that, just tips the scale. So that's unusual. I mean, really, if you look at your own affinities, just being here tonight, being able to listen to this text, not to me necessarily, listen to this text, shows accumulated good roots and affinities. Sorry, it's true. Now, how much you're going to develop them, I don't know. But because it's understood by the Buddha that this is really emotional attachment, unexamined raw desires and emotions working here, then there has to be a different way to get at the stimulant to cause people to move away from this, what's called the upside down dream thinking. I mentioned the Heart Sutra last week because that's the most concise expression of this state, going from total confusion to total awakening. And it's very short. You could memorize it in a half an hour maybe. And it's something you could recite every day, both in English and Chinese. But in reciting it, memorizing it, reciting it every day, it will grow on you. It'll create another groove. Like I talked about the groove of habituations. This creates a groove of wisdom. It starts just with drawing a line. And then each time you recite it, you deepen that groove, you deepen that groove. And eventually, it starts to become you. It starts to work on you in the inside out. But there's a description of, at the end, when the Bodhisattva, after looking at this carefully and cultivating himself or herself, gets to the point and realizes there's nothing to attain. Same line from the text. How does it go? There's nothing to attain. And because there's nothing to obtain, they're unimpeded in their mind. Their mind is free. And because there's no impediment, they are unafraid and leave distorted dream thinking far behind. That's the key. Because they know there's nothing to obtain, they're free of impediment, and the fear is gone. The fear and anxious grasping is gone. And the absence of that opens to an inversion back up, right side up instead of upside down. So this is, I guess, sometimes people think that this is all about philosophical inquiry in the intellect and erudition, and even learning languages like Pali or Sanskrit or Tibetan or Japanese or Chinese. All of that helps, and the words help. But it's very clear if you take a text like the Vimalakirti Sutra where it says, you have to understand that the words are the finger pointing to something. They're pointing to the spirit, to the meaning. And if you're foolish, you just keep looking at the tip of the finger thinking you've got it and you don't. So he says, those who attach the words but don't go after the spirit are like the foolish person who looks at the fingertip that supposedly points to the moon but never beholds the moon because they're stuck looking at the fingertip. So this parallel here has to do with actually going in and seeing cultivation as having working on thoughts and emotions. When they say no false thinking, they don't mean just intellectual cogitation. They're talking more, I would say 99% more, about the emotional, affective setting up that we do. Most of our lives, our intellect rationalizes after the fact, but we make our choices and decisions for better or for worse on our guts, what we call our guts, which is this either cultivated or uncultivated emotional reaction phase. So in cultivation, this has to be got at. This has to be addressed. In any event, so if you look at it, you got this text that says, living beings and lands are entirely still and quiescent without reliance or discrimination. Then they're able to enter the Buddha's Bodhi. So when they're able to see this in a constructive, healthy way, it's not like the bottom falls out. They are actually released from the prison of misunderstanding and they enter the Buddha's Bodhi. Of living beings and land, nothing can be attained, and knowing that's the meaning, they go into it. The question then is, what has to happen for this shift or change from fear, and I will say craving? Those are the two sides of what the attachment are. And fear and craving doesn't have to do, please don't misunderstand, if you're in a burning house, you should be afraid, okay, and get out of the house. This is talking about a psychological fear that doesn't have any basis in reality. Real fear is a positive thing you should use to protect yourself. So don't go down that road. And don't say, oh, I don't grasp anything, I'm going to stop eating and drinking. No, no, no. Okay, so you take what you need, food, clothing, sleep, don't be silly. But you don't go beyond the need to the unexamined greed that drives this thirst, because then that becomes a psychological crutch, and the irony is it doesn't satisfy. So the more that you get driven by that particular longing or craving, the less satisfied you are. That's why there's a particular emptiness or ennui in the modern, because we have more than we ever had historically available to us. And yet the more we get, the less we feel satisfied. We feel a profound emptiness right on the cusp of getting that next thing, that next acquisition. And this is burnout stuff. This is how you really burn out. There's a new book I'm reading by a Korean philosopher called The Burnout Society. It's really worth looking at, but he goes into detail about the drivenness at all levels, psychological, emotional, career, in the quietest spaces, how we have become chasing in this way and burning out in the fumes of our own desires and fears. So anyhow, worth looking at. So I want to share maybe one part of that with this text. And of course, I didn't get to half of what I wanted to. This has to do then with understanding that almost all, I'm going to say this out boldly, and all of the teachings, all of what we call the Dharma, are medicine to be taken and used to heal an illness. They aren't to be put in bottles and kept in a cabinet, preserved. Check the expiration date on your dharmas. Now, if it's expired, it's not because it wasn't useful, it's because you didn't use it. Get rid of it and find something that's going to use it, But when they serve their purpose, they're no longer useful. If you persist in using the dharmas in those ways after it served its purpose, it becomes what they call dharma sickness. It becomes a different kind of sickness. Because instead of using it to cure the illness, you're using it to hold yourself in a state that I am a sick, ill person and I can never be cured. So this is changing something like remorse and change into remorse and guilt. That's just one example of that. So when I say that it's medicine to be used, all Dharma's that way. All Dharma, even Buddha Dharma, is an expedient device. The mention of Buddhas and the mention of Dharmas only become about because we make our marks of confusion. So when the text says, when the Buddha says, all beings have that nature, all can become, all are inherently that. The only reason they don't realize that, it's not that they don't get it. The only reason they don't realize that is because of the grasping and attaching and this confused upside down thinking. This changes the whole formula because all your activity then is to let go, untie those knots, release what's obstructing. That's what Dharma does. And once the release is taking place, there is no purpose for Dharma. However, what Dharma does is, what Dharma works for you, wow, it's all over the map because each of us ties ourselves up in a different way. And so that's why it said there's 84,000 different Dharma tools, untying knot devices that are taking us out of that. For people, for example, who are totally scattered, you begin a contemplative practice, grounding yourself in quiet, stopping and contemplating. For people that are incredibly acquisitive to the extreme, and I'm not going to name names because there's some big names out there, you practice giving, you do dana, and you balance out your illness with a corresponding ointment, if you will. So people who are dissolute and harming, you start to hold precepts, no killing, no stealing. And countervailing that transforms that into something else. And once it's done, for example, with precepts, the precepts now hold themselves. Once you hold the precepts and use them to countervail these habits and tendencies, after a while they become second nature to you. They become your nature. And you wouldn't even think about doing something like that because you so returned and gone back to your original ground that it's inconceivable to you to do something. In any event, this is the power of expedience that's being talked about. So if I could, I'm going to share a passage tonight where this comes up. This is from the Lotus Sutra, and we're using that at our class now at the university. We're looking at the first 3 chapters. This class is a class on hermeneutics, and hermeneutics has to do in Buddhism with when there seems to be a contradiction or inconsistency between one teaching and the other. For example, I just said, oh, I'm going to tell you to meditate, and I'm going to tell you not to meditate. You should recite the Buddha's name. That's the number one Dharma. Sitting in meditation, that's the number one Dharma. And somebody says, see, contradictory, inconsistent. And so the hermeneutics in Buddhism come up to how do we make sense of this? Is it a contradiction? Or is there how does this method to the madness? Is there rhyme and reason to this apparent contradiction? And one of the things they come up with, fairly unique to this tradition, is that there is no fixed Dharma, but rather all Dharmas are expedients to counteract whatever those tendencies and situations are. That is Dharma. So it could very well make sense that giving him an aspirin and giving her chemo are totally appropriate, and not one's better than the other. It's which one works for the various illnesses. So that hermeneutic is called fangbian in Chinese, or upaya, the Sanskrit, which they translate as expedient means. Okay? So here's the passage I wanted to share with you tonight. This occurs after the Buddha has his full awakening, and he's going, OMG, right? Not literally, because you wouldn't say, oh my God, but it is how unexpected he has this total understanding. After training himself, after purifying himself, after getting rid of all the false thoughts and all of the habituations, suddenly he gets to this state inconceivable. And he said, now I look around me. And he says, "Oh Shariputra," he's talking to Shariputra, "you should know that through the Buddha eye, this awakened vision I see now, I see beings wandering in the 6 states of existence." So he's taking pause here. He's not just enjoying himself or exclusively, because from the very beginning, compassion has been one of the key elements in the Buddha's quest for awakening. Wisdom and compassion. I want to know how things are. I want to know how they work. But also, I feel an empathy instinctively for the suffering and confusion of others. I cannot separate myself from this feeling. I cannot divorce myself. It's impossible. That's there at the ongoing. Even when his first quest starts in his lifetime, and you read it in the life of the Buddha, you see that it was both this curiosity and infinite longing to know what's going on. We're born to die. There's this brief interval between. I can't figure that out. But also, he sees around him the state of humanity and of all living beings caught up in the cycles of existence. So he's motivated by both. But he says, "I see beings wandering in the 6 paths of existence who are poor, deprived of merit and wisdom, who are entering the bitter path of birth and death, and are suffering repeatedly without end. They are deeply attached to the desires of the 5 senses, just as yaks are attached to their tails." Now, for most of you here, not coming from an agricultural environment, you're going, yaks attached to their tails? What does that mean? I've never seen a yak. You might not even seen a tail, you know. So I think what it has to do here is it means totally enamored with some aspect. So you could change it to men enamored with their 6 packs, women enamored with whatever, children enamored with their toys, adults enamored with their retirement funds or whatever. But it has to do with being enamored, attached to something that is really silly, but you can't let go of. They're deeply attached to the desire of the 5 senses as yaks attached to their tails. Obstructed by greed, they are blind and cannot see. They have eyes, it says later, but they cannot see. So it doesn't mean they're blind physically. It means they're blinded by the greed and desire. They do not seek the Buddha, a Buddha who has great power, nor do they seek the Dharma that puts an end to all suffering. They're deeply immersed in wrong views, seeing things wrongly. And here's a key line. The first time I read this, it just hit me. They try to eliminate suffering through suffering. Wow. So the 5 senses and the acquisition and that desires thing that we think is going to end the suffering actually augments it. So they try to end suffering through suffering. I feel great compassion for such beings. Sitting on the terrace of enlightenment for the first time, looking at the Bodhi tree and walking about during those 21 days, I was thinking thus: the wisdom I have obtained is subtle and supreme, but the faculties of sentient beings are dull. They're attached to pleasures and blinded by delusion. How could I possibly save such beings? So even though he has this profound understanding and the compassion is still there, the gap between that understanding and getting it transmitted to anybody in even a most rudimentary way is almost like inconceivable to him. Ta-da! Then Brahma and his Devaputra, Shakra, the world protectors of the 4 quarters, Mashvara and the other Devas, these are the gods. That's interesting to me at this point. The gods know what to do, but most people, are still wandering about here. But the gods go, no. They, together with retinues of hundreds of thousands of myriads of attendants, paid their respects with palms pressed together, and they begged me to turn the wheel of Dharma. So now he's in a bind. He wants to check out. On the other hand, he has compassion, but he doesn't see any way to begin this teaching. He can't say, all dharmas are still and quiescent, and this is wonderful. There's just no way. So, if I only praise this Buddha vehicle, those beings who are submerged in suffering will not believe this Dharma. And because they reject it and do not believe this Dharma, they'll fall into the 3 troubled states of beings, who knows for how long. I would rather not teach the Dharma and instead immediately enter nirvana. So basically he's saying, I'd rather not teach than give medicine that they won't be able to handle and it won't work for them. Because he's thinking the Dharma is this profound Dharma. And this is the passage that really strikes me. Then I thought of the power of skillful means practiced by past Buddhas. At that moment, the upaya thing comes in. This path that I have attained should now also be taught as 3 different vehicles. So then he says, I will break the Buddha vehicle down to Arhat, Pratyeka, Bodhisattva, and so forth. And when I thought this, the Buddhas of the 10 directions appeared with beautiful voices and praised me. And it goes on. It's like, finally, you got it. You got upaya now. And we've been doing that, and that's the nature of all Buddha's teaching. But what it comes back to is this idea then that the nature is whole and complete. We all have it. The gap between having it and realizing it is so wide that these texts, these teachers, and all these devices come to help close it bit by bit, step by step, in expedient ways. The only thing I will say on that, and Mike can talk about this a little bit next time, just as I said, my deepest habit, bad habit, I did not recognize. And when my teacher pointed it out, even then, it was like, why is he saying that to me? I don't have that problem. You know? And then when I finally realized, oh my God, I really got that problem. And I have it even worse because I didn't think I had that problem. So that problem's really a problem. When I realized that, I saw, holy moly, I would have never come up with that on my own, that this was what I needed to work on. So in the same way, I just, as a gentle cautionary note, it may be that the best medicine is the one that is a little bit bitter to your taste. In other words, the medicine that is most honey flavored and sweet chocolate centered may not be exactly what you need. And so don't think that upaya is whatever feels good. It might be, as the Chinese say, good medicine is often bitter to the taste, true words are often harsh sounding. So when you go down this road, there's sort of a cautionary thing. If you have a good teacher will be able to move you to that sort of little edgy space that you need to be in to make this kind of change. But be careful if you're cultivating just on your own, not to just do whatever you like and whatever feels good to you, because part of this challenge of this thing is it's just going to a doctor and having the doctor touch or push on that sore spot, figures out where it is. If the doctor just massages and gives you M&Ms, you know, you're never going to get cured. So you kind of have to be a little tough on yourself, but not too tough. So anyhow, I'll stop here tonight. We'll go into more of the verses next week.
Okay. So I want to a little bit echo what Marty says about upaya and the expedient approach of the teaching. As Marty mentioned, that the teaching itself is expedient, right? It's meant to produce a kind of transformative insight to change us, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves. And often what helps to bridge the teaching is, I can say, expedient spiritual devices, which are a lot of in our tradition and many other traditions, like recitation. We just did evening ceremony. We meditate before this class. We recite. We as well bowing. And it's interesting that this teaching can be embodied, and often these spiritual devices are connecting us to the body. Even as I'm sitting right now, I'm using the particular method, right? Sitting in full lotus, try to be more straight as fast as I can, and has this kind of catalytic influence on me as I'm sitting, bringing awareness, kind of more settle me in. But the stories about bowing and kind of bowing as a medicine and a little bit bitterness. Recently, Jin Chuan and myself and a few friends I see here, we were in India, and we have interesting a walk through the old city. It's the part of the immersion. I probably also would kind of expedient way to shows what our consciousness and heart is capable of. Means compassion, kindness, and so forth. A little bit Jin shared before, and myself, how big impact on us has this one walk of the whole city. But some point we visited different temples. It was a Jain temple. This another, I will save this for another story. But what really touched my heart, what's happened in mosque, in the mosque, in the old city in Ahmedabad. It was my very first visit when I came to the mosque, and it's really something I really encourage you to see and to experience when you come to Ahmedabad. It's a really special sacred space. You enter to the big square. Behind you is the very noisy, busy, little bit chaotic, alive city. And here you feel silence. And in the middle of the square is like a pool. I don't know what is exact name for that, but it meant that people who enter, they're cleansing themselves. The pool, they washing their hands, their faces, their feet. And I was with the group of people in Jinchuanshu with myself. I put scarf on my head because it's one of the way to show the respect. So we entered the mosque, and the tour lead Jayesh Bhai, before we even entered to the space, he put his hands on the step, the kind of stone step, and he stayed for 10 seconds maybe, and we asked him, what you doing? He says, I just want to honor all the pilgrims and devotees and people who came before here and transformed their hearts from the centuries. Says, okay. I never entered the sacred space. Even sometimes at this monastery, I rush to come into the ceremony. But this is also another skillful, expedient device. This whole space here, what we have. So we came to this beautiful spells full of pillars, and I just kind of tried to follow Jayesh Bhai, who was next to me, Jinchuanshu with the right side. So we kneel down, and I see Jayesh Bhai start bowing like, classical Muslim. He's making the prostration. I look at him, and I start bowing as well. I see Jinchuanshu also is bowing, and very strange thing happened when I bow down in the mosque. Something deeply hit my heart, that's speaking to Marty about bitterness, that sometimes these spiritual devices can invoke something or poke us into some place, like a big acupuncture point. Suddenly, I kind of see my relationship with, it was the place of divine, with the God I was raised with, the Catholic Church and so forth. And I have kind of a very bitter sense that my relationship is not very wholesome. I was very judgmental for many years. And it's interesting, in the one bow, you can have the kind of insight like, boom, you feel that in your body, in your heart. And it often happened for me as a be cynical. Be kind of cool, funny, make a jokes about here and there. And this is how I notice, not just about the God or the divine or my previous more tradition when I raised with, but also with people that I feel a little bit better, quote. I'm the Buddhist, I'm the cool monk, I'm more compassionate than maybe these religious people, right? And I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Come on, and suddenly when I bow down, all of this come out in me in the mosque. Embarrassing. It's like, Jinwei. It's kind of, Marty speaking about seeing something. And it's really kind of, it was the moment, and my response from my heart, I second times bowed down and I say, I'm sorry. I cannot live like that, I'm sorry. And it was interesting because it's kind of a bitterness to recognizing even that how I can act like that. It's very embarrassing. At the same time, I could be different. So I remember after these few bows, actually we asked another person who take care of this temple, please teach us how to bow. And for him was very unexpected question from Buddhist monks to learn how to bow in the mosque. But I remember when I came out from the temple, I feel kind of light in my shoulder. Something changed in my body. Talking about this kind of catalytic, transformative healing. Something healed, something in my heart released in this moment. And very unexpected, but it's very interesting that we cannot plan often this more understanding of ourselves what can come out. We cannot kind of sign up for that. It can sometimes hit us in a very unexpected moment. So this is my story, and I'm very grateful for that, and it was very impactful on me. I still thinking about it, and what is my relationship to my tradition when I grow with, but also to my ancestors and so forth. I can honor them. I can still practice. I can be Buddhist monk, but I can deeply respect their spirituality, who they are, and everyone who cultivate among of ourselves. Yep. So this is a story for today. And speaking about expedient events, I want to announce a few of them. We have a retreat on June 3rd to 10th in Sudana Center, from mindfulness to heartfulness, led by Doug Powers. Marty also will offer some teaching, as well as Dharmaster Sure, what was quite amazing to have all the senior disciples together, and we have an opportunity for 7 days be in silence, meditate and investigate expedient teachings all together. Also, we have in July 22nd, Buddha Farm. This is our highlight retreat in the year. We go to Oregon, stay in the nature, another expedient place to transform ourselves. 7 days, we sleep in the tent. This will be the Guanyin session. We recite the Guanyin name for 7 days. Rav Heng Sure will lead it. Those of you who never have a chance, I highly recommend it. This is very transformative experience. Also, we have here everyday practices online, and Thursday, Friday, we have meditation open for everyone if you wish to join us. And tomorrow will be Rav Heng Sure will speak from Queensland, Avatamsaka Sutra. Through YouTube or Zoom, you can listen him, and I think this is it for now. You can visit our website, berkeleymonastery.org. You can find all informations. Yep.
I forgot a poem. I'll do it next week. I always like to do a poem, and I forgot. So. Transfer it?
Yeah. May every living beings, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. because our hearts are one. This world of painters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.